Welcome to the Something Blue Fan Who review. This is an ongoing series on the Something Blue channel where I, Jed T.E. Rhodes, otherwise known as that guy you might have heard in a thing once, will review Doctor Who fan content, be it fan films or fan audios. And today we're reviewing one of the older and, in your humble reviewer's opinion, better fan films out there, The Wrath of Eukor. Fun fact, the first female Doctor ever cast, much like the first black Doctor ever cast, the first trans Doctor ever cast, and the first of any other minority you'd like to mention ever cast as the role, was a fan Doctor. This is a common thread in fan media because, as you Doctor Who fans should know, Doctor Who fan creation is the trailblazer for a lot of Doctor Who official content. If you don't believe me, ask Nick Briggs about the audio visuals. Actually, don't, or if you do, take pictures. Barbara Benedetti takes centre stage in The Wrath of Eukor, the first of 4 films starring Benedetti as the Doctor. It's interesting to note that, like John Hurt as the War Doctor, Barbara Benedetti was not a Doctor Who fan, she was an actor. A highly regarded theatrical actor no less, who was cast in the part while not really understanding the show. It's a testament to her professionalism that this never comes across. Let's start with something that I feel bears saying. The Wrath of Eukor is, by modern standards, cheap as balls. Yes, I know, stop sniggering at the back like a demented gibbon. It's Doctor Who and it's a fan film, being cheap as balls is its default standard. But what I mean is, this. Seattle International Films, the group that made this and the sequels, put a lot of time, money and resources into this film, and what that bought them was a very cheap TARDIS prop, a bunch of folks in a wood, and a couple of janky props to imply an almost always disembodied alien intelligence. The same resources applied to the modern day allows for groups like MB and Homeland, DW 2012 or DDK to make entire epic stories with CGI, multiple locations, extras and a much larger scale. It's important for modern viewers, spoilt brats as we all are in today's technology-savvy era, to be reminded of these things. You're feeling duly reminded? Good. Wrath of Eukor was made in 1984 by director Ryan K. Johnson, while Colin Baker was the incumbent Doctor. And it is awesome. It is by no means perfect, either in concept or execution, but it is very much awesome, and a real benchmark of the fandom. In an age where the default fan film is people in woods, the visuals of a bunch of people in woods are a touch cliché. But trust me, you young whippersnappers, this was cutting-edge wood traipsing in the day. Benedetti's Doctor is met, post her regeneration from, we presume, a version of Colin's Doctor, on a Victorian street by Carl, her companion in all 4 stories, played by Randy Rogel, who went on to write for Batman the Animated Series. There's some historical inaccuracies. I don't think a chimney sweeper of the Victorian era would call a police box old, given that the model the Doctor has hadn't been invented yet, but it's a characterful scene, and introduces us well to the dynamic. Fast forward to the 80s, and some Nam vets are threatening a dude with a knife. The amount of times I have to write that sentence during this series should never be more than 1. This is the key weakness of this story, one that's fair because it's dated. These guys are Nam vets, who most likely have PTSD. This is briefly touched upon by the dude, a journalist named Vince Wallace who's wanting to intrude on their time, but never really dealt with properly. Instead, they're presented as having never got out of the jungle, shown as needlessly hostile and at times unsympathetic. But it was the 80s, so we have to shake our heads and sigh, and realistically fan productions are often shit at dealing with mental health issues. None of us are experts after all. Other dated elements include a little bit of what can be called transphobia. There's misgendering, again from Vince, and some general "oh, she used to be a man" jokes that, again, make us roll our eyes and go, that'd be the 80s then. Also the sadly very 80s amount of "we don't need a woman, weak-willed woman, listen lady" sexism, which, to be fair, mostly uttered from unsympathetic characters and fairly standard, and even relatively progressive, for the time. Please permit your humble reviewer a moment to go, "oh bollocks, piece of media I love isn't perfect, ah!" I know this revelation isn't going to sit well with a lot of people. A lot of fan media from the Wilderness era and before is held in extremely high regard by a subset of the fandom. But hey, it's still good. Indeed, my previous criticisms are not intended to dismiss out of hand the many, many things this episode does right. The Doctor, played brilliantly by Benedetti, has authority and strength, compassion, patience without suffering fools gladly, and a unique twist of awkwardness and breeziness that is handled very, very well. In contrast, the villain of the piece, the eponymous Ukor, is not very impressive. He possesses a guy, he stands, he talks, and then he is defeated by technobabble. But that's okay, because even the modern show for realsies sometimes does the exact same thing. I suppose the fundamental conclusion here is that there is a lot to love in this story, not least the Doctor herself. You'll hear me say more than once as we carry on that getting the Doctor right is half the battle, and Barbara Benedetti was the right choice for this role. I encourage younger viewers to go check out her work, and older viewers to revisit it and, as I did, shake your head at how 80s it all is. Welcome to the Something Blue Fan Who review. This is an ongoing series on the Something Blue channel where I, Jed T.E. Rhodes, the grooviest Doctor, will review Doctor Who fan content, be it fan films or fan audios. Today's episode is the first full story of Doctor Who Guardian from DDK Productions' Broken Memories. Released in 2016, this is the first of a long-running series DDK made. Speaking candidly, I really like some of their later work, so it's interesting coming back to this piece, which is less sharp. Still, visually this is an impressive piece. The location, clearly a museum of some sort, is very impressive, if very obviously a museum. There's a lot of nice effects shots setting up the space. The dialogue, perhaps less impressive. There's a lot of exposition to introduce things, a lot of references, and some dialogue that makes no sense or could do with some sharpening, and yeah, okay, now I'm sorry, but I have to be mean. So, any new Doctor needs to be introduced in a way that tells us who they are. After all, the Doctor is half the battle, as I said in the previous review. Kieran Jenkins' first introduction is being a douchebag. Seriously, he's a douchebag. The first thing he does is insult his new companion. The second thing he does is insult his new companion. The third thing he does is act like a complete lunatic. And the fourth thing he does is insult his new companion. Bet that wasn't in your bingo card. Later on, he also slaps said companion. He's arrogant. He's insulting. And he's also irritatingly inconsistent. That last part may be a script problem. A specific bit is that he tells Barry to go after someone, and later when they reunite he tells him off for wandering off. At the very least, at the end he does point out that he's being unsympathetic. That doesn't make it better. The emphasis, by the way, is that this is a new companion for this Doctor, Barry Dalton, as played by Thomas Rainford. He seems more vaguely irritated than terrified when he realises what's happening to him and that he's been transported to the Victorian era. He trusts the Doctor quickly without real cause, gets told off and insulted, and generally is treated a bit like dog shit that the Doctor stepped in. The resulting Doctor and companion dynamic is odd, and frankly almost comes across as abusive, the aforementioned slap. This is presumably unintentional. The wacky dialogue for the Doctor feels very much like baby's first eccentric arsehole genius dialogue, the sort of stuff a Rick and Morty episode would have, but it does colour the experience a touch. Or maybe I just prefer my Doctors a touch less insufferable. Supporting cast are also touch and go. Bill Rowan as Detective Smith, dressed more like Halloween Sherlock Holmes than a Victorian detective, is a touch light and less than assertive, and does hand movements like John Culshaw's Tony Blair, but at least handles the sometimes less than stellar dialogue well. Luke Rose, later the Valeyard in DDK's last few episodes, plays the various policemen, or one very busy policeman, well enough. Again, dialogue issues notwithstanding. The Dark Keeper, as played by Adam Grange, is a less than intimidating villain. The fact that Barry feels confident enough to mock this character in his first episode as the companion doesn't exactly give the villain an impression of strength, no matter how dark the cloak and gravelly the voice is. The story's a little all over the place. There's bits that feel lifted from Deep Breath, actually a lot that feels lifted from Deep Breath, just less sharp. A lot less sharp. There's some ominous foreboding prophecies, a staple of fan films, there's some lumbering dialogue, another staple of fan films, and the whole thing is wrapped up with a lens flare and a CGI mindscape with voiceover. Oh, and there's an I'm so awesome speech from the Doctor at the end. Another staple of fan films, because of course there is. There's also a line about having sex that feels really overly crude, but hey ho, this thing was written by 20-something men, and having been one, I do know that this is the least crude comment we could have had. And the episode ends on a cliffhanger that I'm assuming makes sense at some point. On the production value side, you know, that thing we don't care about as much because this is a fan film, there's a bunch of little things that an official production would have caught. Wristwatches on Victorian gents, shoddy costumes, one upper class woman with a nose piercing. But it's a fan film, there are worse things. Overall, it should be stressed. This is the first full fan film from this team, and they do get much better. This one feels like a list of all the cliches a fan film could hit in one fell swoop, complete with an overly referential / lifted straight from the show plot, and some straight Moffatisms. For all that, it's ambitious, and is definitely trying something. On a final note, however, am I the only one who thinks the Doctor looks better in his predecessor's outfit? Welcome to the Something Blue Fan Who review. This is an ongoing series on the Something Blue channel where I, Jed T.E. Rhodes, the man with many coats, will review Doctor Who fan content, be it fan films or fan audios. And today, we come to one of the more ambitious fan films ever made, Fire and Ice. A long time ago, during the 2009 specials, there was an ambitious idea. A collection of fan filmmakers would release a whole series of 13 45-minute episodes. It did not work, for reasons which anyone even vaguely familiar with the production of television in the modern day could probably tell you. Namely, making fan stuff with barely any money is fucking hard! This didn't stop leading man Kenneth Dinkins from giving it his all, however, and the result was this episode, whatever the hell is left of the second episode, Guardian of the Solar System, and apparently there's mixed reports of what exactly is left of that, if anything, and one final scene where Dinkins apparently preempted the in-between McGann and Eccleston thing that John Hurt's Doctor was by regenerating into a composited Christopher Eccleston face and turning the last minute of that video into the video from Proof by I Am Clute, but with Doomsday playing. Let's leave aside that choice, if that's the word we want to use, and focus on Fire and Ice on its own merits. And let's not beat around the bush, there are a lot of merits. The main cast is simply incredible. Dinkins, under the pseudonym Kenneth Raymond Moore for whatever reason he chose, plays a Doctor who's wiry, alien, eccentric and yet grounded, though perhaps a touch too ethereal and lacking in authority to really feel entirely there yet. But hey, it was a first episode. The companion, Alice Hemingway, is played with aplomb by Jennifer Richman, who brings a real sense of a lost, detached young woman who would realistically jump at the chance to travel with a weird alien dude just for a sense of getting out of what is effectively a kind of crap and certainly very mundane life. Said mundane life is also represented by a somewhat less stellar turn by Carmel Stowe as Marissa. No disrespect to the actor, I'm sure she was told to play it this way, but Jesus fucking Christ, this character is annoying! This is presumably to make her seem normal and mundane next to Alice's more detached character. All it manages to do is make us wonder why Alice hangs around with someone this aggravating and doesn't punch her. The rest of the cast are fine, there's nothing especially special about, well, any of them really. Cody Presswood does a turn as a unit soldier who dies and is fine. Emily Richmond does a turn as a unit officer and is fine. It's worth noting, however, that in amateur productions, and even indie productions, which this one might well count as given the scale and budget, fine is a pretty good standard to have hit. The cinematography is similarly fine, although the wannabe Snyder filter is a bit bleh, and I say that as someone who quite likes the Snyder filter vibe. The sound is perhaps a touch less fine. From the sounds of it, none of the camera audio could be used, so everything is dubbed, which gives a weightless quality to the performances that tempers even the best of them. The story itself is a middling runaround. Ice warriors are invading, there's some arc stuff that never goes anywhere, etc. Nothing too exciting. Effectively standard Doctor Who fare. The pacing is off. There's long conversations happening while the Doctor's being murdered, and it genuinely feels like some moments are a touch too, I don't know, portentous? The real problem, though, is that this entire episode takes itself way too seriously. There's humour, sure, mainly focused around Marissa, but this thing is laden with foreboding, where everything feels heavy and, again, portentous. This problem isn't new to this story, though, and God knows it's not gone away in fan productions since. The effects are very good for indie in 2009, which is to say that it's nowhere near as impressive in an era that has The Last Doctor or Fall of the Doctor in it. There's a lot of solid compositing work that still falls flat in the modern age, especially when the same unit soldier, played, I presume, by Cody Presswood again, is copy-pasted a dozen times for a climactic battle. There is also a green screen TARDIS that, for all the lovely hard work that no doubt went into making it look good, is still just a green screen TARDIS, and doesn't stand up to a modern fan audience's expectation of this sort of scale. Complaining about effects is crass when we're all zero-budget indies trying to make fun things, but this story seems to hinge on those effects. And hinging on effects is never a good strategy for Doctor Who in general, never mind when it's in fan content. In conclusion, this is a damn fine pilot for a series. If we'd seen more, perhaps we'd have stronger memories of this series, and perhaps it would sit among the greats. But the modern fan discourse, like the demented goldfish on acid that it is, has all but forgotten the efforts of Dinkins and co, which is a crying shame, because many of them could learn a thing or two from this series. At the very least, they could learn a thing or two from Kenneth Dinkins' efforts, even if it's just don't announce a full 13-episode series when you're not sure you can make more than 2. Welcome to the Something Blue Fan Who Review. This is an ongoing series on the Something Blue channel where I, Jed T.E. Rhodes, master of my fate, captain of my soul, and pretentious git like no other, will review Doctor Who fan content, be it fan films or fan audios. Today, we return to the halcyon days of the wilderness years with the epic story Master Plan from the Projection Room. The Projection Room guys worked very hard to make some very good content, and I've also been in pubs with them, which makes objectively reviewing things very hard because that might be a rather awkward pub conversation if I ever run into them again. If I hated Master Plan. Oops! Just gave the whole game away there. Master Plan was an early 2000s story where a lot of the plot threads the Projection Room had been laying the foundations of since their founding got resolved. This after a decade of classic-style serials of increasingly high production quality, scale, ambition, and general resemblance of the classic series itself. This particular serial has the dual advantages of being considerably more polished than any of their previous efforts, and considerably more ambitious than any of their previous efforts, and trust me, the word considerably is doing enough heavy lifting there that Superman would work up a sweat trying to carry it. The general plot involves the Master, obviously, as embodied by the deliciously camptastic and bold Phil Newton in England, convincing an army of Cybermen and an army of Daleks to work together to take down their greatest nemesis, the Doctor, as played, initially, by Chris Hoyle. You may contain your surprise at this truly original and stunning plot at your leisure, but all joking aside, this was actually a rare feat to accomplish in fan films at the time when this film was made. Modern films may make stories with armies of Cybermen, Daleks, and other monsters about as often as the average viewer has hot dinners these days, but in those days, this was an achievement, in bold font and underlined for extra emphasis. Saying too much about the story would require a lengthy explanation of the very dense plot of this serial. Indeed, the first serious criticism one might have of this story is that it is immensely packed, so much so that a sardine might look at it and think it a tight squeeze. We have payoffs for a collection of arcs, take a deep breath. There's the Chris Hoyle Doctor's broken TARDIS, the Time Crystal, first thing in the Projection Room's first ever piece, the Crystal of Akelon. The Master's plans are a direct continuation of efforts they made in previous stories. This story is a direct sequel to a previous story, A Stitch in Time. There's a companion introduction, technically two, multiple plots being plotted, multiple characters doing the plotting, and that's not to mention being a proper take on the abortive first version of this story, The Deadly Alliance. And another deep breath. There's also gun battles, deaths galore, unexpected and possibly unwelcome if you're squeamish gore, assassins with cool eye patches a whole decade before Moffat made them cool, witty repartee, and a host of other bits and bobs going on that mean that these 4 episodes never feel padded, barring one plot point that is discussed in a moment. Short of literally throwing a kitchen sink in the episode, and frankly I wouldn't be surprised if I missed one somewhere, there's not much they could have put in this story. Oh, and lest we forget, there's also a regeneration. Yep, spoiler warning all you folks who think spoiling a 2 decades old fan film is bad form, but Chris Hoyle's Doctor, after 4 and a bit stories, counting the Deadly Alliance, fucking dies! Right at the start of the second episode, no less. This is, depending on your perspective, either an utterly bonkers and inspired choice that elevates Master Plan to masterful, or an utterly bonkers and stupid choice that creates an entire episode dedicated to post-regen shenanigans, which could otherwise have been 2 minutes of train montage. Thankfully, said shenanigans are not massively overdone. This isn't the post-2005 era, where it seems that every regeneration story has the Doctor twatting around in their predecessor's coat, barfing gold CGI, and generally making a tit of themselves for most of the runtime, before speechifying and beating the monster with the power of their ego. And if, dear audience, you think I'm talking about yours specifically, I'm not, but it's very interesting if you think I am. No, the new Doctor, played by Gordon England, gets into it fairly sharpish, minus a little bit of obligatory twatting around in the costume that is happily lacking in Matt Smith impersonations, mainly because Matt Smith would have been a teenager at the time this was made. Let's go back to Chris Hoyle's fucking death for a minute, and yes, I'm going to keep calling it that. Any story where a Doctor fucking dies had better be one of the best stories that Doctor ever gets. Is this the case for Chris Hoyle? Well, no. Candidly, it's not as character-focused as the later piece The Schrödinger Effect. Yes, I said later because fan Doctors never die, motherfuckers. It's not as mysterious as The Crystal of Akelon, though it is a great deal sharper in its writing. It's not as blatantly fun as A Stitch in Time. But, and this is important, it is good. The Doctor gets to do all sorts of doctory things. There's speeches, tinkering with the TARDIS, a car chase, and of course, the heroic and defiant final scene with him, in which the Doctor again fucking dies! Just wish his actual last words weren't, "I won't die, just regenerate." A touch underwhelming for a version of the Doctor that was 6 years old at that point. Though it should be noted that this was, again, the Halcyon Classic era, where epic final lines and speeches hadn't yet become the cliché. The illustrious Benedetti Doctor, for example, didn't get a final line at all. She was just shot, but we'll get to that when we review Broken Doors one of these days. The serial serves the companions less well. It's technically the introduction episodes for Flynn, Susan Gibson, and Devlin, Mark Ellis. Devlin actually gets introduced, though in true timey-wimey fashion, a whole 7 years before that term became the most overused quote in Who history, the Doctor has already met a future him in the previous story, and this is actually addressed, which is a nice detail. It's a fun introduction, and Mark Ellis does well. Flynn, on the other hand, is introduced in medias res, as most of the Hoyle Doctor's companions were. She's sort of there already, a character who the Doctor talks to as though he's known her for ages. We've little sense of their history, little sense of how they met, but they do have a fun dynamic, and Susan Gibson plays the character very well. Then there's the Doctors themselves. I keep saying it, getting the Doctor right is half the battle. This is after all Doctor Who, not Star Trek, where if you hate Wesley Crusher, you can still watch a Data episode and vice versa. If there is such a thing as a person who hates Data and loves Wesley Crusher, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Chris Hoyle is, by this point, a veteran of the craft. His Doctor is worldly, light but with steel, and you believe the impassioned pleas he gives when he's about to be shot to fucking death by the Daleks. Called in England, on his second outing, ironically after a turn as a future Doctor in A Stitch in Time, is lighter in some ways, harsher in others, quicker to anger and sharper tongued, and provides a very different energy. I can't rightly say whether either Doctor would have been better served being the sole Doctor of this affair, but on the flip side I can't rightly say that it's not satisfying watching a regeneration story that doesn't conform to what fan media has long since turned into the tired and worn out cliches of the post-regenerative episode. There are, as I say, always bits that are hit and miss. There's gore, some nasty wounds on Mr. Hoyle, and a poor TCE'd person getting smished, which can be a bit excessive and your mileage may vary as to whether you find this story padded. But, overall, this story delivers epic and grandiose adventure and is beautifully made, and I can heartily recommend watching it. I do not, however, heartily recommend watching the regeneration scene if you have a weak stomach, as this may be the only moment in Doctor Who visual media, to my knowledge, where we ever see Doctor Who upchuck. Welcome to the Something Blue Fan Who Review. This is an ongoing series on the Something Blue channel where I, Jed T.E. Rhodes, murderer of the fourth wall and owner of too many coats, will review Doctor Who fan content, be it fan films or fan audios. And today, in what may be the most sadly predictable choice known to internet fandom, we will review an episode from noted fan production group DW 2012. Specifically, we will be looking at Eternal Darkness, or rather, the remastered version, first released in 2019. Anyone who is familiar with the world of Doctor Who fan productions will be aware that the first thing that pops up when you look up Doctor Who fan film, in that precise order, is DW 2012. It is also the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th and 7th thing, and possibly even the 8th, 9th and 10th, possibly interspersed with similar groups' works. DW 2012 is one of the most ubiquitous and well-known groups out there, in part due to the budget and camera quality of their work, and in part because Luke Newman, the producer, lead writer, composer, set builder, and star of this project, built a surprisingly good TARDIS set in his parents' back garden shed, using presumably half the LED lights in Birmingham, and people tend to like that sort of thing. Eternal Darkness, or rather the remaster of Eternal Darkness, is the 4th episode of Series 1. A quick word on the term remaster. This is in fact a from-the-ground-up reworking of the original episode with a completely different collection of Doctors, a not-so-completely different script, and references to the then-in-production Series 5, which stars Dominic G. Martin as the Purple Doctor. Martin's Doctor also appears in this episode in an extended cameo, while main Doctor duties are taken on by Newman as the Little Red Doctor, and George Gydra, debuting as the Blonde Doctor. Other Doctors include the Velocity Doctor, played by Crystal Moore, who appears via television screens, because Velocity is American and even DW 2012 can't afford plane tickets on the fly, and the Cravat Doctor, played by the most poorly colour-graded Connor Chadwick in history. It should be noted that the remastered series completely replaced the original episodes, which no longer have an official release. This is part of what my friend Matthew Mills refers to as the old video problem. What does one do when the older videos no longer match the output you create? The stated intent of the remastered series is to bring the older stories into line with Newman's current standard. The fact that, subsequent to this, Newman began filming in 4K may mean that this version of the episode ceases to be official in a few weeks, months, years, whenever. At which point we may review the remaster, assuming that enough changes between versions happen to make it worth our while. Certainly the script won't change that much. The story is something of a runaround, where a collection of composited-in figures who look like Halloween costume dementors, known as Soul Snatchers, are seeking to steal the various Doctors' souls in order to extract the darkness from them and resurrect the Valiard. Played very well by Scott Mason, who, along with Newman, Chloe Norton as companion Jessica Whitehouse, and Daniel J. Patton as the Irish Doctor, is one of the only returning cast members from the original episode. The running around in a graveyard is well shot, but can be a touch repetitive, especially when there is a collection of cameos of various canon Doctors, played by a collection of whoever Newman could get to wear a cosplay coat for the shot. The script is also somewhat lax, requiring a great deal more sharpening than it received when being remastered. The fact that entire scenes can be seen practically word for word from the 8 years older original does speak to a certain focus more on visual effects than the storytelling. Also lacking is the use of other Doctors in the script. Gydra as the Blonde Doctor is especially underserved, as he spends the entire episode effectively being the Little Red Doctor's companion. This may be a running theme for that incarnation, but we'll address that another time. It is worth noting that every single thing that makes the Blonde Doctor the beloved incarnation he has become, apart from Gydra's superlative performance, here somewhat different from the more refined version we see in Prism, Dwem and Watforth Wall, is completely absent. Indeed, every single thing that makes most of these incarnations unique is absent, which makes sense, as most of them are reading lines written for completely different actors a decade ago. The one exception to this is the Irish Doctor, who has elements of his ongoing arc in his own series referred to in this episode. This is one of the only moments in this episode that the Doctors who aren't Newman feel like they're Doctor Who, as opposed to a collection of side characters who happen to have funny coats. Apart from a brief moment of the Purple Doctor reminding us that there is a companion apart from Megan Williams in his series, the Doctors feel like props, rather than the heroes of their own stories. A common thread of the DW 2012 episodes is an effort to emulate the tone of the RTD and Moffat eras, and the resolution of the episode is suitably modern Who, with the Doctors coming together to expound on their, or rather the Little Red Doctor's, awesomeness. This is at least decently shot, but a touch underwhelming if one is not invested in these characters. Conversely, if one is invested, this can be an impressive moment, so your mileage may vary on that front. At least decently shot is a compliment that can be paid to most of the episode, and it is in the cinematography, camera quality and effects work that we can see the most improvement. There are some excellent shots and some really disturbing puppet work for the Valiard that is genuinely well done. The fact that this is presented alongside the Soul Snatchers, who very much look like Halloween costume Dementor wannabes, and some odd colour grading moments, means that there is a strange inconsistency in the quality of the episode. Critiquing budget and design is somewhat tricky with fan projects, as we've said, due to the zero budget nature of any project, but there clearly was a budget here. It was just spent in different places to different degrees. Overall, this is a mixed story. If one is not especially demanding from the dialogue and story, this can be a fun, well-shot runaround by fan film standards. But for a multi-Doctor special, it's lacking in anything meaningful for most of these multi-Doctors to do. But, on the plus side, it introduced the world to the Blonde Doctor, so we must always be thankful for that, even if it did lead to 4 years of the same 5 pictures being used for cover art. Welcome to the Something Blue Fan Who review. This is an ongoing series on the Something Blue channel where I, Jed T.E. Rhodes, whose middle initials hold him at gunpoint, will review Doctor Who fan content, be it fan films or fan audios. And today, we embark on the first fan audio review of our series. I know, I'm sorry. The Space Wail, the first of the audio visuals. I may have joked once about mentioning the audio visuals to Nick Briggs with the implication of him being less than amused. Truth be told, however, since I don't fucking know the man, I don't have a clue what he or the rest of the people behind the audio visuals think of them in the spacey future year of 2024. I know from fan history and fan lore, inaccurate as that shit may prove, that Nicholas Briggs might as well have renamed them Big Finish the Beginning, for all that they're basically a dry run for Big Finish's actual successes later on in the 90s. But this his story is from 1984. No Orwell jokes, please. And as the opening oration from the version your humble reviewer listened to says, began as an experiment to see if people would take to Doctor Who on audio format. I don't think it'll catch on, do you? This story features Stephen Payne as the Doctor, not Nicholas Briggs, whose role as the Doctor in this series is now legendary. I still need to put a toothbrush in my top pocket as the Rust Doctor one day. Not being an expert of fan lore, because I'm a sad bastard, but a different kind of sad bastard, I don't know off the top of my head what prompts the change. What I do know is that going into this series fresh in the year of our Lord 2023, at time of writing, is odd. Not least because, in the copy I listened to, it begins with Nicholas Briggs telling us about the founding of the group, then dives into a scene with a damn fine Dalek voice before, well, hopping into Nicholas Briggs telling us that this story and the next one withdrawn from sale because their masters got stolen. It's an odd way to begin a presentation, but maybe it's of more interest if you assume that this is a rip of a tape someone bought. And as Mr. Briggs himself warns, it's primitive. By which I think he means, it's primitive as balls! In the first 7 or so minutes, we get variable sound quality on voices. We get dead scenes lacking in ambiances or echoes, and we get some very bare sound design overall. And you know what? That's all okay. It was the 80s. In the modern age, it's worth remembering that while we selfish pricks of the 21st century have the ability to do all sorts with a phone and free apps in this day and age, the folks behind these had far fewer resources with which to make these stories happen. Getting it made alone would have been a Herculean task. And they are to be commended on the incredible technical achievement of making this fucking story at all. But of course, making this fucking story at all sounds a bit like buying the audio visuals geyser "at least you tried" cake. It must be stated that as much as the sound quality is variable and the ambiance is often deader than Adric and Katerina having a party in a graveyard while they're the only people who turned up, I can listen to this story and not think, my fucking ears! That's an achievement that some audio plays in our spoiled modern age still don't achieve, so kudos, Briggs & Co. But the technical side of things is what it is. So what about the story? I harp on quite often about writing. I have a master's degree in drama with a focus on script writing after all, as I have bragged to literally everyone. So the story is arguably one of the most important parts of any review. Well, it's an interesting one. There's some space fare, a little bit of political intrigue, and some lovely jailbreak stuff. There's some evil computers and sharp performances, but
If you've come to this audio expecting it to be somehow the best thing ever, I mean, you've kind of only yourself to blame if it's not, because it was a fan audio. Make no mistake, it's a good fan audio, and well worth the time if a good old-fashioned classic Doctor Who story in audio format is what you're hankering for. But, as with Dominic G. Martin's turn in Portal to the Past, it's more fascinating for its historical significance than anything it brings to the table on its own merits. Please don't kill me, Nick Briggs.